Jim Allen, thank you for joining us on the Business Leaders Podcast. As one of my dearest friends, and we've known each other for a lot of years, it's such an honor to have you on, and would love to share with our audience just a little bit about you and your background. So, Jim is one of the more dynamic leaders that I have known, and he has a career that spanned wine, financial services, consulting sectors, and also foster youth, which he doesn't have in here, but it's a key part of his journey as well. And Jim, you're the owner of Allen Vineyards, the founder of 83 Vines. What that is an opportunity to bring Sierra Foothills wine to life. Jim was actually in his previous life the COO of Safe Credit Union. A lot of people of our listeners know about Safe. You're also currently serving as the Placer County Wine and Grape Association, and actively should be underscored, involved in local arts and education philanthropy, because Jim doesn't have a charity organization he hasn't said yes to. He's got a list of amazing charities he's involved in. He has a real passion for family, for storytelling, and for community, as that shows in all the different ways he impacts our local community. And Jim blends his extensive expertise into every project, making a lasting impact on colleagues, clients, and wine enthusiasts. I have seen that firsthand over the years, and we're honored to spend some time with you and learn more from you, Jim. So welcome on the Business Leaders Journey podcast.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. And, it's just so great to spend time together with you guys, and for all the others who are choosing to eavesdrop on our conversation. I hope it's worthwhile for them.
Exactly. I like the eavesdropping one. We're going to keep it a secret so everybody, they can feel more exclusive. Right. Hey, you want to eavesdrop on our conversation? That might get them more excited to jump in, That's
After
our new marketing
Dominick
campaign.
Asks, I'm going to do this. Well,
let me tell you a secret. I like it. Well, Dom, kick us off, man.
All righty. Yeah. To start us off, with the first question here, to lay the foundation, I think perhaps, Jim, you could take us through your foundational understanding of leadership, and, what that is, what that means, and, what do many organizations miss about a leadership role?
Yeah. I mean, right there's our whole hour. Right there,
big topic.
Right. I mean, I've been blessed to work for a number of different organizations, to have held leadership positions and ascended to leadership within different organizations. So I've had an experience of what that's like to go from being valued for what you do to being valued for what you can bring people together to do. And I think one of the ways we can begin to sort of, peel this onion apart is to talk about as people move from individual contributors into leadership roles. And I think one of the things that is very poorly done in corporate America is the shepherding of people from those individual contributor roles into those leadership roles. Because there's a set of skills that are required in leadership, starting with listening skills, empathy skills, strategic skills. It's the difference between playing, chess and checkers. And so having that strategic mindset that is not what you're rewarded for as an individual contributor. As an individual contributor in a technology role, in a sales role, you are absolutely heralded, and there's a dependence on you to deliver as an individual. And those people who have a track record of delivering as individual contributors are oftentimes rewarded with the opportunity to ascend into leadership. And you get that tap on the shoulder. There's an opportunity, someone's left, the organization's growing, we're expanding into new markets, we'd like you to take on this leadership role. And at that point, once you get sort of it used to be the desk nameplate, I don't know what it is today that you get in terms, maybe it's a badge you put on your LinkedIn, but it's like, congratulations, you now have the epaulet, you're a leader. it's just sort of expected that you're going to be able to make that transition and leap that chasm on your own, based on your own experience, based on being a follower, based on being a member of a team. And that's not that fails repeatedly. And one of the ways in which it fails is that there's a mindset, there's a perspective change that has to take place between I have to achieve individually in these, various roles. I have to make the sales. I have to drive the numbers. I'm responsible for uptime. I'm responsible for compliance, whatever domain it is you were an individual contributor in. To actually, there's a whole different set of metrics that are about how are we coming together as a group? How are we driving efficiency? How are we staying aligned to the mission of the organization and serving the customers? And in fact, all the stakeholders, whether it's the board, whether it's your peers, whether it's your clients and customers, how are you being accretive into bringing the mass of people together and driving the entire ship in that direction? I've sort of, left a bunch of threads all around here that I think we can pull on. But I think the thing that I really wanted to conclude as a result of that question is that, leadership is a skill set. It's an art form. It's required. Nothing happens in an organization, and an organization could be defined as 2 or more people. You could get, as soon as you have 2 people in an elevator, you have an organization. Who's going to press the button? Who's going in first? Who's going in last? How do we organize the luggage so we're not blocking? What are we doing? Who's pressing the door close button? As soon as you get to 2 or more, you're officially an organization. And there's a skill set that allows that organization as its own entity to survive and thrive.
Well, and Jim, to tease on that, when you are an individual contributor, it's your, like you said, it's your individual productivity, right? That's really tenacity. That's that really good at task oriented work. And when you get into the leadership, it's more strategy. It's more, how do we build the team? How do I build somebody else up to achieve the results when it's so much easier for me to just do it myself?
Yeah.
And so the team becomes efficient to a degree, but they lose effectiveness because the leader's not looking ahead. They're not building the other people. They're not helping them grow and make the right decisions and help be efficient and effective. Seems.
Mm-hmm.
I love everything you're saying. I couldn't agree more.
And I like sort of the science you add to that. Thank you. I've got sort of some of the experience and examples and storytelling, and thanks for punctuating that with it. Well, there's actually a reason for that, Jim.
That's why we compliment each other so well, my friend.
As a leader, what are the most important elements of that role and that job?
Yeah, I think the again, going back to sort of perspective and mindset, having the right mindset is that as I think we'll start with the problem is that many people ascend into leadership and embrace the boss role. And in fact, that's a title that always made me uncomfortable and bristle. There's a lot of baggage that comes along with the boss and being bossy. And I think the more correct description of what's required of the mindset of somebody ascending to and then maintaining a leadership role is that your job is not as the individual player on the field, but now you play a significant role in creating the rules, the boundaries, defining the roles, and then policing those boundaries, those borders, and those roles. And I think it's I've seen it many times as people ascend into leadership, if they're not given the appropriate coaching and mentorship, if they haven't had examples of good and bad leadership, because both are very instructive. But you tend to fall into that bossy type of leader where it's like, I'm going to make all the decisions and this is what we're going to do. And the more effective leader that's going to create a sustainable organization is the one that says, let's get clear and crisp around the roles we each have and we each play around this table, in this room, on this podcast. Let's talk about the boundaries and how we identify and resolve conflict across those boundaries. And I mean, it doesn't have to be as heavy-handed as I'm describing it, but it does have to be the mindset you have, which is it's my role as the leader of this group to make sure, Dominic, you're clear and you understand what your role is, and Justin, you understand what your role is, and to be watching, observing, and saying, oh, looks like we're coming to a boundary issue where you're uncertain as to who owns this, or how your role should be best used to address this circumstance and this issue. And if you and I think a lot of us have had this example. If you don't have leaders that understand the fact that they need to define roles, maintain boundaries, enforce the rules, there ends up being it could be one of two things. And I've experienced both of these. One is you create this sort of, how do I want to describe it? Like cage match, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I don't enforce the rules and the boundaries, and I take a team of people and I say, let's all work to achieve this goal, hit the sales goal, create this product, move this mountain, whatever we're going to do, and I don't enforce those rules, then among all the contestants, there's a cage match that takes place, and eventually someone emerges victorious. And it's the person typically who is behaving in a way that is least sustainable for the organization. They're behaving in a way, throwing people over the top rope so they can get their way and force it down the road. And again, I've lived in that, and I've seen it, and I watched it, and it there's nothing you can say we achieved success in this project, in this endeavor, in this time period or quarter because I let you all go. And Sally, you took a stranglehold control and you threw people out of the ring and just gonna, okay, great. Try and turn that wheel again.
Wreckage.
Try and do the next thing. Try and hit the next quarter and see if those other people are willing to get in that ring and get in and be a part of that team. No, they begin to jettison. I don't want to play in that. That's not cool. So you have
or
to
they're in
be
the ring
able
with
to,
pillows.
I was going to say, you have to be able to, as a leader, have that mindset of, I'm enforcing the rules here in a way that ensures we get success now, and it sets us up for more success in the future. Sorry, Justin, I talked over you.
No, you're good. I talked over you. So yeah, the other side of it is like they're all playing with like pillow fights in there, and they're not, and they have artificial harmony where no one's willing to actually, push back.
And yeah, I don't, what happens is you have fear, uncertainty. It's like, well, and I've seen that as well. When you get a room full of people and every single one of them in their own way says, does anybody know what we're supposed to be doing? Does anybody, and it can have that effect. You talk about pillow fight. It can have that effect of people just being reluctant to step in and share their gifts and skills and talents. As you're an expert in identifying, Justin, they're not contributing those because they're not sure.
Yeah.
Should I be talking? Should I be listening?
Ambiguity.
Should I be taking notes? Should I be leading people? Should I be acting as an individual contributor? What should I do? So all of those problems and many more than we haven't enumerated are the consequence of leaders that don't have a mindset that understand their job is to define the rules, the roles, the boundaries, and then to monitor and manage those over time.
Which is what Patrick Lencioni's book, The Motive, is all about, and it hits on that. It's that idea of you become a leader, you think you're the boss, you're in it because you want the rewards of being the boss, but you don't want to take the responsibility for what everything you just described, to handle the messiness of holding people accountable and keep making sure that everything's running smoothly and defining things effectively. And they have to have that mindset of, I'm here to serve my team and to make it possible for them to succeed, and not just to kind of like do the fun stuff and get the rewards of being in the leadership role,
Mm-hmm.
Which I've seen how you lead, and you're definitely one of those responsibility-based leaders, Jim.
Well, I've seen, thank you. And I've seen and I've lived in and participated in and experimented with the different styles. Because I think that's important. Nobody nobody masters a skill. You don't master bike riding without falling a few times. And so you have to be willing to do that. But again, it comes back to a mindset, a point of view, a perspective that is, I don't succeed without everybody around me succeeding.
Yeah, other focus.
I don't succeed at their expense, nor do they succeed at the expense of their teammates or me. And that's hard to create that environment, that bubble, that dome, that biosphere, and maintain it. Because you can create it, you can create that magical snow globe. And I've seen this and I've enjoyed the benefits of that, but circumstances change. And that biosphere, that snow globe, comes under assault. And most recent example of this was the pandemic. You can have several teams of people in a large organization functioning well, and then you have this externality of, wow, now we need to change all these. We need to figure out how to keep our employees and our customers safe. Now we need to figure out how to do these operations from a different venue than our desks at work. Those externalities happen, and I'm very proud of the group that I was working with as we experienced those, because we were able to adapt very quickly to those new circumstances, and that's a benefit. Again, if you embrace this mindset as a leader, and if you're about creating this environment, bubble in where everybody understands their roles. There are clear rules about communication, about resolving conflict. There's everybody understands what the goals are, what the mission is. Then you have, as a benefit of that, the adaptability of an organization, because they're not all dependent on one person who's the boss telling what to do, or if the boss has told them what to do and is no longer being bossy, them like, well, the circumstances are changed and I don't know what to do now. And I've never felt empowered to actually make my own decisions or make accommodations based on, I don't know what the mission is.
Well, and there's the external and then the internal. So it's like, if you have turnover, if those things occur, which always happen, so it's always a moving target of the stages of team development. It's a constant adjustment. You never stay in the snow globe. So, but if, like you said, if you have strategic clarity around who you are and your purpose and your values, and there's defined roles, and then someone can come in and it will not be as rocky. And you can also manage, like you said, those external forces much more impactfully, because everybody is willing to throw in and use their innovative and outside the box ideas and solutions and bring their full self to the problems that those things create. So I love it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
John,
so so this is a question that's kind of pointed towards someone who is ascending in leadership, right? And with, additional promotions comes additional responsibilities, and certainly there's going to be this temptation to, with all these new tasks, works extra hours, and then you also have, staff that will report to you, and so you have the ability to delegate some of these new, responsibilities. So, Jim, what would you encourage people in this situation where they're in this new leadership role to make sure that they, focus on and do not delegate? What are those key things that they need to hold on as absolute table stakes and not delegate away?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's part of the benefits of moving into leadership in an organization is you begin to have the opportunity to invite people to contribute in a symphony of ways, right? Hey, you're fantastic, what you do here, and you're fantastic in this way, and I've got this idea. If we can come together, how does that seem to you? Because then we'll really be able to affect this metric and go there. I think the temptation, if you're new into leadership, is to look back at what got you there and to say, I got this position because no one does this better than me, right? So I'm gonna delegate these things over here. I'm gonna ask these individuals to contribute in these ways, but this is the thing I'm best at, and so I'm gonna do that. And I think the I think that's a trap. And what happens is if you think about your capacity, um, whether it's in time or thought space or whatever, and you talked earlier about how the fact that we live in all these different dimensions with family and friends and community and vocation and all stuff, education. Um, but it's a trap because what happens is that that's finite, that pie chart of time you have. And now you've taken a wedge out of that pie chart in something that you did as an individual contributor.
Yeah.
And that pie wedge is necessarily something that you don't have the capacity to contribute to in that leadership mindset sense. And the thing that gets most often, in my experience, the thing that gets neglected, right? So again, there's the pie chart. I'm going to carve this wedge out for me as the individual because I'm the best one who can do this, blah, 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 is that the work that we just spoke about in terms of defining and demonstrating culture is the one that takes the hit. Because I want to contribute as my individual contributor. And you know what? I'm the leader now. So you're expecting me to absolutely go Luca or Jordan and deliver 50 points today in this playoff game. And it's great sports analog to look back at like the career of Michael Jordan and when he was the scoring champion and the best individual contributor on the team didn't win championships. It was only a little bit later in his career as he realized, you know what, if I am able to get everybody involved,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically in times when they're going to be at their best, if I can not only get them involved, but if I can set them up, then we're all going to win. That leadership mindset of establishing culture, behavior, right? Culture is nothing more than a set of behaviors and the rewards that go on around those behaviors. You can say our culture is collaborative, and then somebody has an idea or somebody makes a mistake, and then they get shamed or they get ostracized or they get penalized. Your culture is what you do. It's not what you say. And so you have to constantly be holding yourself accountable to those behaviors that are demonstrating the culture. And that's exhausting. And that takes everything you have. And so you have to delegate those tasks, those individual responsibilities. And yes, even those things that made you a star as an individual contributor, you need to distribute all of those. Give other people the opportunity to rise and shine and enjoy that spotlight. And you need to embrace the fact that my job now as a leader, and one that I cannot delegate, I cannot say, hey, by the way, I'm in charge of this organization. Justin, you go show everybody how to behave. Doesn't work. I can delegate, you go do the books, you go do the marketing. I want you to show up to sales. I want you to make sure the facilities are running well or stripe the parking lot. You can delegate all those things, but you cannot say, I want you, somebody other than me, the leader of the organization, to demonstrate what it's like, what our goal state is for an environment, for a culture. That is 100% on you as the leader. And so as you ascend into leadership, and it doesn't mean the supreme leader, the most important leadership in any organization is the supervisor leadership. That first step up the rung from individual contributor to now being in charge of a team or a work lead or a teller line or whatever. That's the most important. But they take their cues from the managers, from the executives, and ultimately from the CEO. And so your job in walking the walk is the most important thing you can do as a leader in terms of demonstrating the culture that you aspire to have.
Well, I would love to bring, because I love sports analogies, and we're all sports fans here. I'm hoping some of our listeners, our eavesdroppers, are sports fans, so that we can keep this relevant for them. Otherwise, they're in deep trouble because I'm not going to stop doing analogies. I look at everything you just said. Not everything, because there's a lot of nuance to it, but I think of Kyle Shanahan. For those of you're a Gator fan, I don't know who are you, Dom? Do you like any football teams? Do you have?
I'm not. I'm much more of a baseball guy than a football guy, but hard pressed, I'd have to say Miami Dolphins.
Okay, well then you got McDaniel. Well, it had McDaniel, so you had some of the Shanahan tree, so it keeps it relevant.
We'll go back
Basically,
to Don Shula. That's what we'll
yes,
go.
yeah, right.
Glory
Perfect.
years.
Just glory years, right? But with Shanahan, he is an offensive guru, so he's been basically the offensive coordinator for the Niners, and he even said multiple times, "I don't like special teams. I don't care about special teams," and yet special teams has messed up their team multiple times in the past because he abdicated his leadership responsibility as being the top leader, because he's a creative, he's an inventor. If we were looking at working genius, so he's very innovative and he loves creating the game plans, but that takes him away from, like you're talking about, Jim, being able to focus on the core within all the different segments of the business to keep everything running smooth, not just that the offense does really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great example of executives when they go from individual contributor to, from an assistant coach to a head coach, or from a contributor to a marketing manager to a, let's say, chief executive, right? He's still
look at Dan Campbell. Look at Dan Campbell, the Detroit Lions, who lost Ben Johnson, the phenomenal offense coordinator. And then he's like, well, I'll just start calling the plays.
I'll do it myself.
That was a disaster.
Yeah.
And I would say that the organization, I don't know, because I'm not in the locker room or the building, as they say, but I'm willing to bet there was a consequence there with him feeling like, okay, I got to start calling the plays. There's something you cannot do as a result of that. And it's likely what you've given up is that higher level behavioral standard setting and maintaining. And I think, going back to your question, Dom, is that there's no one lever, one button, one factor that's most important. It's a fantastic, rich broth of flavors and things that have to come together and simmer, and we can go to the wine analogy. You have to have this sort of dynamic equilibrium of acids and tannins and sugars and alcohol, and but you have to have that mindset that I'm responsible for this. And I think we do an injustice to a lot of people ascending into leadership roles without really explaining to them, you're going to feel a little bit like you're going out on a wire without a net. I'm going to ask you to do some things that you're not comfortable with. You're going to make some mistakes. When you make those mistakes, your first reaction is to run back to what it is that you did so well, that you were so comfortable in accomplishing as that individual contributor. But what I need to do as your mentor is to say, keep going, push through that, go further, not go back. And I don't think that happens enough. And I think it's because we've sort of been unwilling to allocate the money for those types of training programs, the time and effort around, formalizing mentorship roles and programs. Certainly, I remember 35 years ago entering corporate America, and there were training programs. My first job was, wasn't a specific role where I was doing X. I was part of a cohort in a 12-month training program, and it was going to be at the end of that 12 months. Where can we put you? Where have you demonstrated your greatest areas of achievement and or interest? But we've sort of grown impatient for that, and there are a number of reasons why, and it has to do with how quickly businesses moved. It has to do with the number of the challenges we've had over the last, my span's 35 years. And so I look at like the .com bubble, and I look at the 2008 recession, and I look about the pandemic, and there are those externalities, and they had this and what the, Treasury did, and the interest rates, and how that distorted capital allocation. I mean, all these things happened that that distracted us from investing in our people to help them embrace the roles in leadership. And as a result, we have a lot of organizations that are suffering from leadership vacuums from that supervisor level all the way up to the top, in my opinion.
Well, we value a lot of things we can quantitatively measure, and a lot of these types of, leadership skills, employee engagement, developing people, building a strong culture. It's only been the last 10 or 20 years, even this idea of organizational health and some of the elements of leadership development have really started to take root, because it's harder for those quantitative kind of analytical brains to like wrap their mind around the value of it if you can't put it to a bottom line number, I feel like. And we've had many conversations in your backyard around the wrestling match between, the people value and the numbers bottom line value people. And they usually are at odds.
And I think there's a yes. And I think there's a very human bias to try and overly simplify. And that's not always the case, but sometimes I find it's like, let's overly simplify. And I'll give you a great example. We had a problem in the organization around attrition, and it was frontline attrition, and people were leaving, and there was a lot of discussion about, well, let's send them really nicely worded compensation worksheets so they know how lucky they are to work here. Let's give everybody a $25 credit that they can use to buy corporate apparel, right? Let's do these, people are leaving. Let's do something simple, quick, and dirty, and let's try and immediately stop people from leaving.
That $25, that's going to get me to stay. Well, I mean, corporate apparel, $25.
That's right, exactly.
I'm in.
If I can get a pair of socks, I'm going to stay. So what was fascinating is we solved this problem, but you had to dig into it, because there was a point of attrition, and that point of attrition was somewhere between 12 and 18 months. So people weren't leaving in the first 3 months, like, I can't do this job, it's too hard. They weren't leaving in the first 9 months saying that I don't think I can ever be good at this job. They got to 12 to 18 months and they're like, you know what? I'm doing this job and I feel really comfortable in this job. What's next? And they didn't have a path, right? I mean, as you started to dig into it, it's like they didn't feel a path. Well, so again, there was this idea of like, let's just make paths. I'll give you a great example. Let's make, instead of people being supervisors, we'll have supervisor 1, 2, and 3. And so we'll break it up into 3 different versions. And so you go from supervisor 1, and then 6 months later you can go to supervisor 2. And we sort of create this, this fake paradigm of ascension that's supposed to satisfy your need for being on a career path. No, the problem was, and it had many consequences, we were hiring supervisors and managers from outside the organization. That had 2 faults to it. One is people who were working their way up the organization saw, oh, the person who's now my boss or their boss came from outside the organization. So clearly the only way I'm going to succeed is I need to leave. The second problem that was actually more corrosive was that these people we were bringing in mid-management didn't understand the mission, the values, and the culture. They brought those with them from any number of places where they were successful as, individual contributors. And so they came and they said, here's what made me successful there, and tried to overlay that on top of what we had. What fixed it was saying there's only one path to moving up, and it's an internal only path. And as a result, people stuck around especially your best people, because that's who you want to stick around and incentivize and focus on. They stuck around, and as they moved into leadership, they had crystal clarity to the values and the mission and the culture. And when you sat with them and you said, now I need you to walk the walk and demonstrate what our culture is like, they're like, I got it, Jim. I know exactly what that is.
Yeah,
And so that's a great example of,
so spot
it's
on.
not, it wasn't, it wasn't you giving people, high fives, or, let's go have a pizza party at every office location, and that'll make everybody feel valued.
Well, our society focuses on symptoms. So it makes sense in businesses, we would also focus on symptoms, like the more surface solutions, not getting to the root cause. So, Dom, what do you got, man? I could keep going down the symptoms versus root cause the lane for a long time, but I want to allow the play by play to draw us
Yeah,
back to
no,
what
absolutely.
you
And like
got.
that was amazing. And this question is very much in line with kind of what you
See?
extrapolated and
In
talked
line.
about. But as someone who's stepping into leadership, obviously you have a new set of responsibilities, a new set of people that you're responsible for, outcomes that you're responsible for. So how should leaders think about their actions and consequences to actions, and not just get totally frozen by analysis paralysis and keep the organization moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, as you move up an organization, um, the consequences of making a mistake are sometimes uh, magnified, right? I mean, you're like, well, if I was a loan officer and I made a mistake, it was a delay, or the underwriter couldn't make a decision, using a banking, context here. And then you work your way up and you're like, okay, well, if I make a mistake in terms of pricing loans, uh, now what I have is the trailing 4 quarters of reduced income because I mispriced everything we did, right? You can get that, in your word, that paralysis, that comes with playing and experimenting in this new role of leadership. And I think um, I think there's one behavior that's important to embrace, and that's the behavior of making little bets. And in fact, that's the title of a book, and I can't remember the author here, but it's a
I
spectacular.
have the book.
There you go. And
Yeah.
and so, yeah, so it's again, going back to mindset, going back to, what's your perspective, and that is that you need to experiment, you need to play, you need to explore styles. I remember one time in a group of salespeople, where I actually, said, I'm very deliberately going to explore this kind of ultra rah leadership style that resulted in me, at the end of that meeting, like pounding my fist on the table, and we're going to crush the competition. And it was so inauthentic, and it was so bad. It wasn't my style. It was great that I went through that. It was great that the people who were in that room sort of forgave me for doing that. Of course, that leaned upon a lot of trust that I had built up. And they're like, whoa, that was kind of a different side. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I thought I would try it. Didn't really work out for me. So, but I didn't do that to the whole organization. I didn't do that in front of the board. I did it in front of a team of about 4 or 5 people. Like, yeah, this isn't going to work out. And so I think a lot of times it's about how you choose to break big tasks into small tasks, how you again go from strategic to, back your way down into something tactical that's going to be in line, and then make sure. And I like the term bet, because a wager is something that you have a certain probability of losing, right? There's a certain probability of losing something. I'll give you a great example. So I I had this idea that we were basically going to have like store sales. it's not a new idea in retail, but it was in financial services, right? I'm going to put the branch on sale. And there are any number of reasons why that was a bad idea. And I heard them all. All of them were presented to me. I was threatened with all these imaginary consequences that were going to result as this. And I said, I acknowledge all that. I still think the idea has merit, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it one time in one location only for a brief window. Because I just want to see. And I'll tell you, this is where the challenge becomes, and this is where the as you get better at this, as you continue to sort of sharpen the blade over time, you begin to understand exactly how big or how small that bet needs to be. Because sometimes you can make it too small and then you don't learn anything from it. It's got to be big enough where you can learn something, but small enough where it's not going to sink the Titanic, right? It's just going to be that it's just enough of a sample size to show that. The end result was it was a behavior we did for years that was extremely successful across the organization. And they didn't all work out that way, but that's an example of one that worked out. And to your point, Dom, when you asked the question, was there risk in that? Institutional risk? Absolutely. Was there individual risk? Absolutely. And I would say to all our viewers and eavesdroppers who are new to leadership, aspiring to grow in their leadership, understanding that taking risks is a part of it. If you are absolutely 100% totally risk averse, you should not aspire to a leadership role. And embrace and love and absolutely, kill the game in being an individual contributor. And there's no shame in that. There's no surrender in deciding I'm going to be the best database administrator, and that's I'm going to be the Redditor of database administration. They're going to call me in when things are going crazy. That's phenomenal. And you can earn the same or better compensation, and especially how we are today, you can have an online following and your podcast and all that kind of stuff. But leadership inherently requires you to take risk and have some level of comfort with that. Yeah, Justin.
Couple of quick things. First of all, Little Bets I looked it up. It's Peter Sims. I couldn't. That's the author's name for anybody of our eavesdroppers who wants that book. But the second thing is, fear of failure is such a big thing especially when you get into leadership. And I think as an entrepreneur in particular, it's just like that fear of rejection, fear of failure. But I found bets is a great way to look at it. I've come up with like prototype to fail. And I think that model for people can really give them a visual in terms of you're just prototyping. Everything you just described is perfect. I hope that's a nice little clip. But that concept of, hey, as a leader, you do fail. But you don't fail the way you think you fail. Fail just means first attempt in learning. So Start small, start contained, try something out that you want to try and take a risk. But do it in a way that's not going to bankrupt anything. It's kind of like going to the casinos with, I'm only going to spend $30. Whatever happens, I'm still okay no matter what. But if I win, $50,000 from my $30, that'd be pretty awesome too. Kind of that concept.
I like the and I don't know if it's a real quote or a made up quote, but it's something attributed, to Edison saying that he didn't fail to make a light bulb 10,000 times. He learned 10,000 ways that a light bulb wasn't going to work. And that was valuable learning. And so that's part of that's part of one of the fun things about leadership is you can get to choose and define, but that's built upon what we talked about the first half hour in this podcast was around creating that culture and environment defining those roles, protecting and preserving those boundaries, making people feel, helping them to understand how they're contributing, not getting in their way by forcing yourself into being an individual contributor, and sort of deciding, yep, let's take some of these little bets and what we can learn for the purpose of achieving something greater.
Love it.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Jim, this next question, it's a simple one, but it's going to take, a lot to kind of figure out and, grapple with an answer. As a leader, how do you go about measuring your success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the as usual, it can't be oversimplified. You have an increasing number of measures and metrics that are available to you as an organization. Obviously, profit. You have net promoter score. You have, a number in each of these domains. You have these very quantifiable measures. But I think there's and I don't want to, go too esoteric on this, but you have each of those measures that's available to you in leadership. What you're seeking to do is define like a derivative of those. So you're looking for that trend line, right? Because it's your role in leadership is not to win that quarter, not to win that day or win that week. Individuals have that, right? And we goal them that way, and we train them that way, and we give them tools that way, and we measure success that way. But when you get in leadership, it's about trend lines. Am I winning more days than I'm losing? Am I winning in ways, let's say profit, but I'm doing it at the expense of greater attrition? I think there's a whole world of sort of management accounting that involves sort of creating measures and metrics that you can, that are not like your gap measures, but you're actually, you get to sort of choose them and work with them and make sure they apply. And I think in leadership you have the opportunity to be more creative, and again, that's why I liked it. So I was in charge of a skunkworks project of community engagement, and so I had to put together a number of sort of hard metrics. How many organizations, because it was meant to be peer-to-peer for organizations. How many organizations embraced us to the point where they let us do an event on their property? Of those, how many accounts were opened? Of those, how many stayed open 12 months later? Right? You have those sort of hard metrics, and you need those. But there was an internal. There were a couple of these sort of softer measures, and I remember saying, I said, when we find ourselves in a public forum as an organization, and somebody spontaneously says, "Man, I see you everywhere," that's going to tell us what we're doing is effective, right? It's not just about us, riding a stationary bike. We're actually having effect and impact of awareness in and around the community. And again, that was the Skunkworks project. How do we create a community engagement program, and how is that effective? And Jim, how will we know it's effective? And I'll say, because we'll show up somewhere and it'll be a Chamber of Commerce dinner, and there'll be 1,000 people there, and someone will come up and say, "I see you everywhere." That's how we'll know we've done it. And then that
Where's
happened.
the qualitative? Where's the measure? That's the hard thing. Where's the metric of that? That's, it's like,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. And that's where
that's what's,
and I think there's increasing value placed on storytelling and narrative. And I think that, and I've been able to do some participate in some programs with some esteemed institutions, even at Stanford Business School, where, there are professors who are talking about the value of storytelling and the value of narrative. And then it's about, to the question is, how are you measuring the impact of the storytelling? Well, it's about behavior changes and looking at how behaviors are changed based on the stories you're telling. And I think you can, you have to get creative in the ways you want to measure that. It's not just about clicks or page views. It's not just about, those things are important also. I'm not saying throw those away, but when I use the term find a derivative, mathematically you have a curve, but when you take the derivative, it tells you the slope. What's the trend line look like here? Am I trending up or am I trending down? And I think that's where in true leadership, that's where you want to live.
Well, and I only ask that because I'm with you. I mean, I love that, and that's exactly how I think. And I have a hard time like quantitatively measuring those things so that I can convince other people that's really
Yeah.
valuable. So thank you for.
I mean, I'll give you a great example. So I love Net Promoter, right? I'm a big fan of that, and I remember implementing that. And for those of you who don't know, it's a very simple measure of saying, would you recommend me or my business? And it's a 10-point scale, and if you're not 8, 9, or 10, then you're not going to be recommended. In the organization in which I implemented it, there was a real value placed on hitting a specific number. Out of 10, we had to get 8.3, or once we've achieved 8.3, now let's move the goal up this year to 8.4, to 8.5. And I really bristled at all the times that those conversations happened, because Net Promoter at its best is like a compass. And a compass doesn't tell you when you've reached your destination, unless your destination is the North Pole. A compass is just pointing a direction. And it really only matters as you're progressing on a journey, as you're looking at that compass and it's pointing the direction. Are you continuing to move in a direction toward your destination? And so the value is in, yes, you're moving toward it. No, you're not. You're moving away from it. And so Net Promoter, I believe, I don't think the founders of Net Promoter sell it this way, but it was more important to me to look at that over time and specifically overlay externalities on that. Oh, we had big rate shocks. Oh, we had employers leaving the community. Oh, we had a rebranding. Oh, we opened or closed a location. How is that? Is it trending up, or is it trending down, or is it staying the same? And then if it trended down, you'd say, well, maybe we could have communicated this better, or maybe we undervalued the consequences of this, and then feeding that back into the engine to say, how do we make a better decision going forward? It's not about hitting that and making sure you keep hitting a certain number. Is it providing an indication that I'm trending in the right direction? And again, as we've said, that goes right back to leadership, because that leadership is about trending. It's about strategy. It's about long-term accomplishments. It's not about quick wins.
Yeah, no,
in my opinion.
I love the point that you made about setting the broader picture, context. I mean, thinking back to COVID. I mean, societally speaking, people are freaked out about getting toilet paper, right? And so if they receive that Net Promoter Score question, are they going to answer 10s across the board? Yeah. Probably not, right? So you have to have that additional context and make sure okay, are we holistically moving in the right direction? And
then you look at that and you say, you know what, maybe we did get great scores. And then you say, wow, how did we do that? Maybe we actually, signaled and communicated and managed expectations in a way through adversity. And, like I said, the pandemic was just so wonderfully instructive. And the organization I was with at the time, and, you're always looking how do I do this better? How can we have done it better? I remember somebody coming to me and saying, you know what, we didn't have procedures in place to handle this. And I said, I don't think anybody did. I don't think anybody foresaw exactly the scope, scale, and duration that this is going to take. But we've done better than most in terms of adapting. And then the question was, well, going forward, let's have better procedures. And I disagreed. And I said, the reason we've done so well is because the adaptability and flexibility of our organization and our people. How do we lean into having an agile, adaptive, flexible workforce? Because then I don't have to worry about enumerating every possibility. This is going to be a bird flu. This is going to be an earthquake. This is going to be a train car derailing. This is going to be... Right. If I just have people who say, there's going to be adversity, and when adversity happens, here's what you can do. Here's how the rest of the organization is there to support you and ultimately that customer and or in alignment with our mission. And they understand that. And so they can make great choices on their own. And they can do it quickly. And it's like that flock of birds in flight. They're going to all follow and go to the same place without everybody having a map as to where they're going or a tick sheet.
Fantastic.
I could go into a whole working genius conversation just on that right now, but I'm going to refrain because we're at an hour.
We'll save that for the next one.
How about keep it in?
Yeah. So we have one last deep down here. One last question. So Jim, you've been part of, large organizations that have experienced a lot of internal growth. And when there's innovation, there's messiness, there's expenses, there's, challenges with, new endeavors. So should organizations think about balancing the institutional stability, yet giving, the ability for new breath, new innovation, and, new business opportunities to be able to sprout?
Yeah. I mean, everybody wrestles with that. I mean, first of all, we have to acknowledge that everybody wrestles with that. And it's been acknowledged in every business school course and book and lecture that success is a gilded cage. That once you've been successful doing what you're doing, you become more and more resistant to change, to adaptation. And, you can look back to people like BlackBerry or Sony Walkman, or it's like, why didn't they think of the iPod? Why did they, they just get caught Kodak. In how do I make a better Walkman the whole time, and they didn't lift their head up and look and see that whole thing. Right. And so I think it's one. There should be familiarity in this conversation. It goes back to little bets. Innovation are bets. And let's make a distinction right now. There's innovation and there's optimization. Optimization is taking something you're already doing and then making it faster or cheaper or less, labor intensive or whatever it is. That's about like Six Sigma and those different disciplines about how do we create optimization, and all of those things work, and they work well, and you can look across the fruited plains of institutions of all kinds and shapes, and they've embraced those and been successful. But true innovation requires, I think, because this is where this is my opportunity to opine, it requires a certain amount of isolation. It requires that you absolutely not only say the words, but you actually demonstrate the behaviors around acceptance of failure. Going back to those 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. Every single thing that you do in that isolation zone around innovation is going to be accretive eventually. Whether it's we should do this or we should make sure we never do that. It requires a different leadership. It requires a more than any other type of leadership, it depends upon curiosity. The people you ask to be a part of anything innovative must have, and this is, Justin, I'm sure has a number of insights that he can point to here, but they must demonstrate and be rewarded for and protected against any curtailing of curiosity. And then I think the thing is that it requires a understanding of nonlinear growth. What did I read at one point that Amazon lost money every year for the first 15 years of its existence or something. But it was purposeful, and how Bezos was looking at that organization. I think the Netflix people, I remember an interview with the CEO or founder of Netflix, and he's like, "We didn't call the company Movies on CDs." We knew in the beginning the whole point of this business was in streaming. It's just there wasn't an infrastructure to the household that would rely on it. So how did we get in position? How did we get under the basket and open with our hand up? So when that happened, we were in position to take advantage of that. So I think without curiosity, without isolation from your day-to-day operations, separate from your people who are engaged in optimization, without acknowledgement that this is a bet, and we're going to right size it so it doesn't sink the battleship, and it requires knowingly and intentionally finding people and supporting curiosity. I think you do those things, and I think over time, because that's the other factor, it takes time to make 10,000 bad light bulbs. You can't just you can't like, well, I made one bad one now. If I get 10 people making 10 bad ones, or if I get 1,000 people making, then no, it takes time. It's like cooking your Thanksgiving turkey. You can't cook it at 1,200 degrees for an hour. I hope did that make any sense?
No, absolutely. No, I think that was, fantastic. I mean, I think that the struggle is, if you're only focused on the bottom line, and you see, an expense, like that expense, is it an investment or is it, just a short-term thing holding back the progress of the organization? And if you look at, a lot of the culture, it's like we're very short. We can at times be very short-sighted and look at okay, what was the most recent quarterly earnings, and how do we improve it, right? So being able to step back and look at all these other variables, super important. I think you did an excellent job outlining those.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah, cool, great. Well, Justin, any other questions that I failed to ask Jim that we should be sure to dig into before we wrap up?
No, I think we've done a good job digging.
Excellent. Well, Justin, you want to close us out?
Yeah, well, usually the last question that we do ask is where can people find you, and how can, for all those eavesdroppers who are like, Jim is phenomenal, and we want more eavesdropping opportunities, maybe with some wine included, because eavesdropping with wine is a really good combination.
We'll end on my latest innovative creative endeavor, and which is 83 Vines, and that's 83vines.com. And it's very mission driven, and the mission is to bring awareness to the great boutique winemaking in the Sierra foothills. It's an under-recognized, underappreciated viticultural area of our fantastic winemaking state. It's populated by more than 200 of these boutique winemakers who are absolutely, no pun intended, pouring their heart and soul into every bottle. And so 83 Vines is exclusive to the Sierra foothills. And what we do is we sort of go up and we meet these winemakers and we talk to them and understand their stories and where were they from and what is their point of view and what are they trying to accomplish. And then I bring those to my club members and say, here's a great example of a Barbera which is a variety that's great in the foothills, but it happens to be made by a woman winemaker in a winery that is owned by a woman, and with the intent of doing everything it's from a woman's point of view, both a woman wine maker and a woman wine drinker. And again, it's a beautiful tapestry of creativity, of individual personalities, and I just want to introduce more people to it. So thank you for that opportunity to share that.
Well, and I'm not going to let you off that easy. So for everybody to know, he's also a very talented winemaker himself. So when you're on 83 Vine's website, I highly recommend also looking at the Allen Vineyards wine, because I know
there are a couple
a lot of
those.
experience that it is delicious, and some of my favorites.
I try and uphold that standard that all those boutique winemakers here have created. So, but thank you, Justin. I appreciate that, and thank you, Dominic.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. Phenomenal conversation today. Thanks for sharing your insights and your experiences, and I really appreciate you carving out some of your time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
Jim.
I look forward to doing it again.